The grand auditorium of Westfield University hummed with anticipation as hundreds of graduates processed across the stage in their caps and gowns. Families erupted in cheers. Phones captured precious moments, and the air crackled with celebration and triumph. But tucked away in a quiet corner by the tall windows, 23-year-old Isabella Chun sat motionless in her wheelchair, her graduation cap tilted at an awkward angle, her fingers twisted together in her lap. Her dark hair cascaded like a shield around her face as she gazed through the glass with empty eyes. While jubilation surrounded her, Isabella seemed imprisoned in her own bubble of silence. "Papa, why is that lady all by herself?" 9-year-old Diego tugged insistently on his father's calloused hand, his unruly black curls bouncing as he gestured toward the isolated graduate. Carlos smoothed his palms against his clean but worn khakis and followed his son's concerned gaze. The young woman looked so utterly alone, it made his heart constrict. Her graduation program lay wrinkled in her lap as though she'd been clutching it desperately. "Maybe her familia got separated in all this chaos, Mio," Carlos whispered though. His instincts told him the situation was far more complex. Diego pulled harder on his father's hand, his 9-year-old heart incapable of ignoring pain when he witnessed it. "Can we go talk to her? She looks really sad." Carlos hesitated. They were here to celebrate his coworker Miguel's graduation. An experience had taught him to be cautious about approaching strangers. But the woman's profound isolation reminded him of his own darkest moments, those times when he desperately wished someone would notice his suffering. "Okay, but just to congratulate her. If she wants to be alone, we'll respect that." As they approached, Carlos could make out the young woman's nameplate. Isabella Chun, summa cum laude, Business Administration. Her brown eyes were glossy with unshed tears, and he could tell she'd been crying. Diego, blessed with the fearless compassion unique to children, broke the silence first. "Hi, I'm Diego, and this is my papa, Carlos. We saw you sitting by yourself and wanted to say congratulations on graduating." Isabella looked up, startled. For a moment, she appeared uncertain how to respond, as if kindness from strangers was foreign territory. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely cutting through the lobby's chatter. Carlos crouched to Diego's level, then looked up at Isabella. "I hope we're not bothering you. My son has a talent for noticing when people might need a friend." Something shifted in Isabella's expression, surprise mingled with tentative hope. "No, it's fine. Thank you for stopping." Diego, oblivious to the emotional undercurrents, continued with his characteristic directness. "My papa says graduation is super important. Are you really smart? You must be incredibly smart to graduate from this huge school." Diego, Carlos warned gently, but Isabella surprised them both by releasing a small laugh, the first hint of genuine warmth they'd seen from her. "I suppose I must be somewhat intelligent. I just completed my degree while dealing with some ... challenges." Her hand unconsciously moved to her wheelchair's armrest. Carlos noticed a slight tremor in her voice, and how she avoided eye contact. There was pain here that ran much deeper than what was visible on the surface. "We came to watch my friend Miguel graduate," Carlos offered, keeping the conversation light. "My son was more excited than Miguel himself. It's my very first graduation," Diego announced proudly. "My papa says when I grow up, I can go to school here too. Do you think they'll remember me?" Isabella's expression soft as she took in Diego's eager face. "I think anyone who meets you would definitely remember you." Marcus caught a glimpse of genuine warmth beneath her guarded exterior. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the celebration swirl around them. Carlos couldn't help but notice that no one had approached Isabella during their entire conversation. No family members searching for her. No friends stopping by for photos. "Are you waiting for someone?" Diego asked with characteristic directness. Isabella's composure faltered slightly. "No, my father is at a conference in Singapore. He couldn't make it." The words hung heavy in the air, and Carlos felt a familiar ache in his chest. The loneliness, of celebrating life's milestones without the people who matter most. As a single father, he knew that feeling intimately. There had been countless school events, bedtime stories, and scrape-knee moments where he'd wished Diego had more than just him, where he'd longed for Maria to be there to share the burden, to witness their son's growth. But seeing Isabella's isolation made him realize something profound. At least he and Diego had each other. This young woman had achieved something remarkable and had absolutely no one to share it with. "Well then," Carlos said, making a decision that surprised even himself. "Would you like us to take a photo of you? Every graduate should have a picture to remember this day." Isabella blinked, clearly taken aback by the offer. "Oh, you don't have to. Papa's really good at taking pictures. He takes lots of me because Mama can't." The innocent statement hung in the air. Diego had never known his mother. Maria had died from complications during his birth 9 years ago, but the boy spoke of her absence matter-of-factly, without the weight of grief that still pressed on Carlos's chest daily. Carlos saw understanding flicker in Isabella's eyes. I would actually really like that," she said softly. Carlos pulled out his aging smartphone and spent several minutes finding the best angle and lighting. Isabella straightened in her wheelchair, adjusting her graduation cap and managing a genuine smile for the first time since they'd approached her. After taking several photos, Carlos showed her the results. "These turned out great. Would you like me to send them to you somehow?" As Isabella gave him her phone number, Diego noticed her graduation program with its list of academic achievements. "What's all this writing mean?" he asked, pointing to the honors. "It means she was one of the very best students in her entire school," Carlos explained, reading over the accolades. "Isabella, this is incredible. Summa cum laude. You should be really proud." For a moment, Isabella's carefully maintained composure cracked completely. "I am," she whispered, and Carlos could hear years of struggle and determination in those 2 words. Diego, sensing the emotional moment, did what came naturally to him. He hugged her, without asking permission or considering social boundaries. He wrapped his small arms around her shoulders. "You're really cool," he announced matter-of-factly. "And you're really brave too." Isabella closed her eyes and returned the hug. And Carlos saw tears finally spill over, not tears of sadness this time, but something more complex: gratitude, surprise, and perhaps relief at being truly seen by another person. When Diego stepped back, Isabella wiped her eyes and smiled more broadly than she had all day. "Thank you, Diego. You're pretty cool yourself." As other families began filtering out of the building, Carlos realized they should probably head home. The drive back to their small apartment was long, and Diego would need dinner soon. But something about leaving Isabella alone again felt fundamentally wrong. "Listen," he said carefully. "I know we just met, and please don't feel obligated. But would you like to get some ice cream? There's a place not far from here." Isabella hesitated, and Carlos could see her internal debate. He recognized the look of someone who had grown accustomed to isolation, who found it safer to stay guarded than risk disappointment. "Please," Diego added, his eyes bright with hope. "Papa never gets ice cream because he says it's too expensive. But today's special." Carlos felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment at his son's honesty. But Isabella's response surprised him. "In that case, I'd love to. And ice cream is my treat. It's the least I can do for the 2 people who made my graduation day memorable." The ice cream shop was a small family-owned place with mismatched chairs and faded photos on the walls. Isabella seemed more relaxed away from the formal university setting, and Carlos found himself genuinely enjoying her company. She was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry humor that emerged once she felt more comfortable. When Diego asked her about her favorite color, she gave it serious consideration before answering. "Forest green, because it reminds me that even in the darkest places, life finds a way to grow." "So, what made you choose business?" Carlos asked as Diego focused intently on his chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. I want to understand how companies work, how they make decisions, how they treat people. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in how businesses operate, especially when it comes to inclusion and accessibility. Carlos heard the passion in her voice and suspected her academic choice was deeply personal. That sounds like it. Could make a real difference in people's lives? I hope so. I want to believe that people in positions of power can learn to see beyond surface assumptions. She glanced at her wheelchair, then back at Carlos. There's so much more to any person than what's immediately visible. Papa always says people are like books, Diego chimed in, ice cream coating his upper lip. You can't know what the story is just by looking at the cover. Both adults smiled at the boy's wisdom, and Carlos felt warmth spreading through his chest. That had nothing to do with the sunshine streaming through the shop's windows. As they talked, Carlos began to piece together fragments of Isabella's story. She mentioned living alone, her father's frequent business trips, the challenges of navigating campus in a wheelchair. But she spoke carefully, revealing just enough to maintain conversation without exposing too much vulnerability. Carlos found himself sharing more than he usually did with strangers. He told her about his job at the construction company, Diego's latest adventures in third grade, the simple rhythms of their life together. It must be challenging raising him alone, Isabella said gently. Carlos was quiet for a moment, stirring his melted vanilla ice cream. Some days are harder than others, he admitted. I dropped out of high school when my father left. Had to help support my mom and siblings. Met Diego's mother at the hospital where we both worked. We had all these plans. His voice trailed off, but Isabella didn't push. She simply waited, giving him space to share what he felt comfortable sharing. Maria died when Diego was born. Complications during delivery. So it's been just the two of us since day one. I'm so sorry, Isabella said, and Carlos could tell she meant it. The thing is, Carlos continued, looking at Diego, who was now examining the sprinkles on his ice cream with scientific interest. I spent so long thinking we were incomplete, like we were missing this essential piece that made other families whole. He paused, then looked directly at Isabella. But watching him today, seeing how naturally he reaches out to people, how much joy he finds in celebrating others, I'm starting to think maybe we've been whole all along. They spent over an hour at the ice cream shop, and Carlos couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so at ease talking with another adult. Isabella had a way of listening that made him feel heard, not judged. When she laughed at Diego's stories about his teacher's pet guinea pig, Carlos noticed how her whole face transformed. The sadness that had surrounded her at the graduation ceremony seemed to lift, replaced by something lighter and more hopeful. As they prepared to leave, Isabella turned to Carlos with an expression that seemed almost vulnerable. Thank you, she said. Both of you. I was dreading today, and you turned it into something I'll actually want to remember. Why were you dreading it? Diego asked, his head tilted with curiosity. Isabella looked at Carlos, who nodded encouragingly. Sometimes when good things happen, it can feel sad if you don't have family there to share them with, she explained gently. Diego considered this seriously, his 9-year-old mind processing the complexity of adult emotions. But we were there, and now we're like family friends, right, Papa? Carlos felt his throat tighten with emotion. Right, Mio. Isabella's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were definitely tears of joy. I would really like that, she said softly. Over the following weeks, an unlikely friendship began to blossom through text messages and phone calls. Isabella started sharing photos of her daily life, her apartment near campus, funny things she encountered while job searching, articles about business ethics that sparked her interest. Carlos reciprocated with pictures of Diego's school projects and stories from the construction site. Through these conversations, Carlos began to understand the true scope of Isabella's isolation. Her mother had died shortly after giving birth to her, and her father, David Chun, was the CEO of a major consulting firm who traveled constantly for work. Isabella had been raised by a succession of nannies and housekeepers, attending elite private schools where her wheelchair made her stand out in ways she never wanted. I became really good at being invisible, she told Carlos during one of their evening phone calls. It was easier than dealing with the stares and whispered conversations. What changed? The accident, Isabella said quietly. Odd to be invisible when you're the girl who crashed into a tree while snowboarding with her sorority sisters. The accident had happened during her sophomore year of college. What should have been a fun weekend trip had ended with a collision. That shattered her spine and changed everything about how she moved through the world. My father flew back from Tokyo for exactly 48 hours, long enough to make sure I had the best medical care money could buy, and then he was gone again. I think my disability represented a problem he couldn't solve with a business strategy or delegation. Carlos felt anger rise in his chest on her behalf, but he kept his voice gentle. That must have been incredibly lonely. It was, but you know what's strange? In some ways, the accident forced me to become stronger. I couldn't rely on being invisible anymore. I had to learn to advocate for myself, to demand to be seen and heard. Is that why you chose business school? Partly. I wanted to understand how people in power make decisions that affect others. I wanted to be in a position to influence those decisions someday. For her part, Isabella learned that Carlos had dropped out of high school at 17 when his father abandoned the family, leaving him to help support his mother and younger siblings. He'd met Maria at the hospital, where they both worked third shift, and they'd fallen in love over shared dreams of something better. We were going to save enough money for me to get my GED, maybe go to trade school. Maria wanted to become a nurse. We had it all planned out. Those dreams had been put on hold when Maria became pregnant, and they'd been shattered entirely when complications during Diego's birth took her life. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done differently, Carlos explained. But for the longest time, I felt like I'd failed her. Like if I'd been able to provide better healthcare, or if we'd had more money. Carlos, you can't. Blame yourself for that. I know that now, mostly, but it took years to really believe it. Since Maria's death, Carlos had focused entirely on providing for Diego and being the kind of present, loving father he'd never had himself. You're raising an amazing kid, Isabella told him. Diego has this incredible capacity for empathy and joy. That doesn't happen by accident. I'm trying, Carlos replied. Some days I feel like I'm failing him, like he deserves more than I can give. He deserves love and attention, and someone who sees him for who he is, Isabella said firmly. From what I can see, he has all of that and more. Their conversations often stretched late into the evening, long after Diego had gone to bed. They talked about everything. Childhood memories, favorite books, fears about the future, dreams they'd given up, and new ones they were beginning to imagine. One evening, about a month after they'd met, Carlos's ancient pickup truck finally gave up completely. He called Isabella, frustrated and worried about how he'd get Diego to school and himself to work. I can help you research used vehicles, Isabella offered. I know it's not much, but I can at least help you figure out what's reliable in your price range. She spent hours that night searching online listings, reading reviews, and creating a spreadsheet of options for Carlos to consider. When she sent it to him the next morning, Carlos stared at his phone in amazement. No one had ever put that kind of effort into helping him solve a problem. Not since Maria died. Why did you do all this? He asked her during their call that evening. Because you needed help, and I could provide it. Isn't that what friends do? Carlos felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that he had been carrying his burdens alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone share the load. When Isabella struggled with job interviews, where potential employers seemed to focus more on her wheelchair than her qualifications, Carlos became her source of encouragement and perspective. Tell me again why you want this particular job, he said during one of their conversations after she'd had a particularly discouraging interview. Because I want to help companies create more inclusive workplace cultures, Isabella replied, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. No, tell me why you really want it. Not the professional answer, the personal one. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Because I want other people like me to walk into offices and not have to prove they belong there. I want kids in wheelchairs to see people like them in positions of leadership. I want to be part of changing how the business world thinks about disability and capability. There it is, Carlos said softly. That passion, that vision, that's what they need to see. Not your wheelchair, not your limitations, your fire. How do you always know exactly what to say? Because I see you, Isabella, the real you. And what I see is someone who's going to change the world one boardroom at a time. Those conversations sustained Isabella through weeks of rejections and disappointing interviews. Carlos's belief in her became an anchor when her own confidence wavered. Diego, meanwhile, had adopted Isabella as an honorary family member without any of the adults' complications or hesitations. He drew her pictures, insisted on video calls to show her his latest art projects, and frequently asked when they could see her again. It was Diego who suggested that Isabella join them for his school's family picnic when she mentioned feeling particularly lonely on a difficult weekend. She can be like my tia, Diego announced during breakfast one Saturday morning. Papa, you always say families are made of people who love each other, not just people who are related. Carlos felt his heart swell with pride at his son's capacity for inclusion, but he worried about putting Isabella in an awkward position. Diego, that's really sweet, but I'm not sure. Actually, Isabella interrupted when Carlos called to explain Diego's invitation. I would love that if you're sure it wouldn't be weird for you. Weird? Carlos laughed. Isabella, you've become one of the most important people in our lives. Of course, it wouldn't be weird. The family picnic was held at Riverside Park on a perfect Saturday afternoon in late spring. Diego proudly introduced Isabella to his classmates and teachers as my friend Isabella, who's really smart and graduated from the big school. Carlos watched her light up as she engaged with the other children, answering their curious questions about her wheelchair with patience and humor. Does it hurt to be in a wheelchair? One little girl asked with the directness that only children possess. Sometimes, answered Isabella honestly. But you know what? Everyone has things about their body that are challenging sometimes. Some people wear glasses to see better. Some people need hearing aids. Some people use wheelchairs to get around. We all have different ways of moving through the world. Can I try sitting in it? Another child asked. Sure, but only if your parents say it's okay. Soon she had a line of third graders taking turns experiencing the world from her perspective. Carlos felt his chest tighten with emotion as he watched her natural ease with the children. She would make an incredible mother someday, he thought, then caught himself wondering where that thought had come from. It was during a quiet moment, as they sat on a blanket watching Diego play with the other kids, that Carlos realized how profoundly his perspective on life had shifted since meeting Isabella. You know, he said carefully, I've spent the last 4 years thinking that Diego and I were incomplete, like we were missing a piece that made other families whole. Isabella turned to look at him, her brown eyes attentive and warm in the afternoon sunlight. But watching him today, seeing how happy and confident he is, how naturally he includes others, I think maybe we've been whole all along. Maybe we just needed to find the right people to share our wholeness with. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, and she reached over to take his hand. Carlos, I've spent most of my life feeling like I was too much trouble for people to deal with, too complicated, too different. But you and Diego, you've never made me feel like I was anything other than exactly who I'm supposed to be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Diego demonstrate his soccer skills to a group of impressed classmates. The sun was warm on their faces, and Carlos felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. What if, he said eventually, we stopped thinking about what our families are missing and started focusing on what we could build together. Isabella squeezed his hand tighter. I'd like that more than you know. 6 months after their first meeting, Carlos got the call that would change everything. He was at work when his phone buzzed with Isabella's number. She rarely called during the day, respecting his work schedule, so he knew it must be important. Carlos. I got it, she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. The job I've been hoping for. They offered it to me. Isabella, that's incredible. Tell me everything. She explained that a major consulting firm had been impressed by her innovative thesis on inclusive business practices. They wanted her to head up a new diversity and accessibility initiative, exactly the kind of work she'd been dreaming of doing. It's everything I've been working toward, she said. The salary is more than I ever imagined, and I'd have a real budget to implement change. I could actually make a difference. I'm so proud of you, Carlos said, and he meant it completely. You've worked so hard for this. There was a pause on the line, and Carlos sensed there was more to the story. There's just one thing, Isabella said, and he could hear the nervousness creeping into her voice. The position is based in Denver. I'd have to relocate. Carlos felt his heart sink, but he forced enthusiasm into his voice. His own feelings couldn't matter when Isabella had achieved something this significant. That's a great opportunity. You have to take it. Do I? Isabella asked quietly. Carlos, these past months with you and Diego, it's been the happiest I've ever been. I don't know if any job is worth giving that up. Carlos set down the tool he'd been holding and found a quiet corner where they could talk privately. Isabella, you can't turn down your dream job for us. You've worked too hard. What if it's not my dream job anymore? What if my dreams have changed? The question hung between them, loaded with everything they'd been feeling, but hadn't said out loud. What are you saying? Carlos asked, hardly daring. To hope. I'm saying I love you, Carlos, both of you. And if there's any chance of building something real together, I'd rather take that risk than move across the country for a job that might just leave me successful and alone. The conversation that followed was one of the most honest either of them had ever had. They talked about their feelings, their fears, their hopes for the future. Carlos admitted that he had fallen in love with her somewhere between that first graduation day and now, but had been afraid to say anything because of their different backgrounds and circumstances. I'm a high school dropout who works construction. You're brilliant and educated and destined for amazing things. I didn't think I had any right to ask you to consider a life with someone like me. Someone like you? Isabella's voice was incredulous. Carlos, you're one of the most intelligent, caring, principled people I've ever met. You've raised an incredible child while working multiple jobs and dealing with grief most people can't imagine. You've shown me what it means to be truly valued and accepted. Don't you dare diminish yourself. But the money, the lifestyle differences. Money doesn't buy the kind of happiness I found with you and Diego, Isabella said firmly. I've had money my whole life, and I've never been as content as I am sitting in your tiny kitchen, helping Diego with homework while you cook dinner. Carlos felt tears he didn't know he'd been holding back start to fall. I love you too, he said. More than I thought I could love anyone again. But I can't ask you to give up everything you've worked for. You're not asking. I'm choosing. I'm choosing us. What about the job? Isabella was quiet for a moment, and Carlos could practically hear her thinking. What if I countered their offer? Asked if I could work remotely with quarterly travel to Denver? The work I want to do changing corporate culture around inclusion. That's something I could do from anywhere. And maybe I'd be more effective doing it from a place where I have the support and love I need to do my best work. Carlos had an important conversation with his son Diego about Isabella, a woman who had become like family to them. Carlos revealed that his feelings for Isabella went deeper than friendship. He loved her the way he had loved Diego's late mother. Diego, a thoughtful 9-year-old, processed this new information and asked if Isabella would come to live with them. When Carlos asked if he'd like that, Diego responded enthusiastically, listing all the fun things they could do together. He then asked a poignant question. "Do you think Mommy would be okay with it?" Carlos reassured him that his mother would want them to be happy. With that, Diego gave his approval, declaring, "Let's be a family with Isabella." 2 weeks later, Isabella negotiated a remote work arrangement to be able to build the life she truly wanted, one centered on love, family, and daily connection. 1 year later, Carlos, with Isabella's encouragement and financial support, completed his associate's degree in construction management. The journey of balancing work, school, and family had been challenging, but Isabella and Diego had been there every step of the way. As Carlos's name was called at the graduation ceremony, Diego cheered loudly, just as he had for his late brother. Years earlier, Isabella, sitting beside him, wiped away tears of joy and pride, wearing the engagement ring Carlos had given her 2 weeks earlier. After the ceremony, as they posed for photos, Carlos reflected on how far they had come. A simple act of kindness on a graduation day had blossomed into a beautiful life. Isabella had found the family she'd always craved. Diego had gained a loving mother figure, and Carlos had discovered that love could grow in the most unexpected places. As they drove home, Diego shared a profound thought with his father. "I think kindness is important, because if we hadn't been kind to Isabella that day, we wouldn't be a family now." Isabella agreed, adding that the most important lessons often can't be learned in a classroom. Carlos marveled at how profoundly their lives had changed. Their story, which began with a simple father-son lesson on kindness, had become a love story that none of them saw coming. They had all been searching for something without knowing what it was and had found it in each other. Their family, built on a daily decision to love and support each other, was a testament to the power of compassion and the truth that extraordinary chapters often begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually just the beginning of something wonderful.